Representative Gooden, I welcome your testimony.
And I think the Enduring Rules Committee are considering H.R. 1398, the Protect America's Innovation and Economic Security from CCP Act, which focuses our attention to the single greatest threat to the American people, the Chinese Communist Party. The threat we face from China needs no introduction. Catering to all those threats, I will repeat, the CCP is the sole entity in control of China, and they are at war with us, the United States, and the socioeconomic and
Mr. Chairman, we can barely hear.
because the microphone was not on. I apologize. Our intelligence community has been raising these concerns for years, labeling China the defining threat of our generation. These concerns were also echoed in FBI Director Wray's testimony before the Judiciary Committee when he said, quote, "No country presents a broader, more comprehensive threat to our ideas, innovation, and economic security than the CCP. China's multi-pronged war against our people, economy, and infrastructure has caused the CCP to infiltrate our communities, sow disharmony, and steal our hard-earned successes. The CCP achieves this by aggressively targeting and recruiting civilians to spy on other Chinese nationals and to steal critical data from their employers. The sectors most targeted by Chinese espionage are the bedrock of American innovation, academic institutions, R&D, and IP. CCP-backed espionage against American companies has become rampant in recent years. Trade theft alone cost our economy over $500 billion annually, with China behind most of it. This bill addresses the problem by creating a dedicated program under the DOJ called the CCP Initiative, prioritizing a focus on countering economic espionage. The initiative establishes an enforcement strategy to protect critical sectors most vulnerable to the CCP's thievery: academic institutions, R&D labs, and the defense industrial base. And while the intelligence community sounded the alarm on China's continued infiltration of our society, the Biden-Harris administration has shuttered the existing programs already. And thanks to them, we regressed without a justifiable cause. And now we have a virtually non-existent policy. And this bill fixes this administration's mistakes by adopting a clear, multifaceted approach. It builds a framework of multi-agency cooperation and mutual consultation, ensuring that effective measures against our nation's greatest threat are never compromised by an incompetent executive wing. To ensure the DOJ's cooperation and dedication of at least some resources in this area, there's an annual reporting requirement. Historically, Congress has not been updated. And by passing this bill, we will not only counter existing cases and deter new attempts, but we will also signal that the CCP's days of targeting our communities are over. And I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this bill to safeguard our country, our people, and our future against the greatest threat of our lifetime. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back chair. Thanks, the gentleman. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The legislation before us today would establish a, quote, CCP initiative, end quote, within the National Security Division of the Department of Justice. This legislation is simply the Trump administration's failed China initiative by another name. For many of us, the clear drawbacks and minimal successes of the Trump program were obvious in real time, and I'm proud to say that I opposed the Trump China initiative throughout its short existence. I was glad to see the program finally ended after 2 years of the Biden administration back in 2022. Resurrecting this failed program, as this bill would do, represents a clear step backwards. When the Trump Justice Department launched what it called the China Initiative in 2018, they claimed its purpose was to counter efforts by the Chinese government to steal American intellectual property. Instead, for nearly 4 years, the National Security Division brought a series of unsupportable cases against Chinese academics at the height of their careers. The government was forced to drop many of these prosecutions. Others failed in court. Even more were overturned on appeal. No matter how you look at the data, a postmortem analysis shows that the China Initiative was an undisputed failure. From the flimsy cases brought under this program to the so-called brain drain of scientists of Chinese descent who left American research labs. The China initiative hurt our interest here at home. The Trump DOJ devoted significant resources to targeting professors of Chinese descent working in the United States, diverting crucial funding and personnel that could have been used to investigate and combat actual economic espionage and trade secret theft. But the China initiative did not just waste valuable resources. If you were a person of Chinese descent working in American higher education, you were a suspect. Rather than keeping America safe, the China initiative divided workplaces, ruined careers, and contributed to anti-Asian hate at the height of the pandemic. Many of my colleagues remember the vitriol, the careless word choice, and the characterization of otherness directed at Asian Americans during that time. Programs like the China Initiative, with its explicit targeting of Chinese citizens working in the United States, only served to amplify these tensions. Finally, the China Initiative produced a chilling effect that hampered American innovation. We now know that foreign talent was discouraged from moving to American companies, and Chinese researchers were less likely to accept positions at our institutions of higher learning. In September of 2022, a report by the Asian American Scholars Forum found that between December 21st and a September 2022 report by the Asian American Scholars Forum found that between December of 2021 and March of 2022, 42% of the over 1,300 faculty members surveyed nationwide reported being fearful of conducting research in the United States. A further 61% felt pressure to leave the United States, and 45% intended to avoid federal grant applications. It's foolhardy to punish China by harming American innovation, but by discouraging researchers from working here, that is exactly what we did. Countries around the world send their best and brightest to the United States for education and to perform valuable research in our academic institutions. But instead of welcoming their contributions to our economy and to our society, programs like the China Initiative encourage them to take their training and their talents elsewhere. We cannot quantify those missed opportunities. There's no way to know what inventions never came to be, but we can realize when we make a mistake and move on. This bill would prevent us from doing so. Despite these well-documented failures, my colleagues across the aisle are adamant that we force the DOJ to restart this failed program. In fact, reviving the China Initiative is a key plank of the notorious Project 2025 agenda, the blueprint for a potential Trump administration. Republicans cannot credibly argue that resurrecting this program is about keeping Americans and our business secrets safe, because we know that racial profiling professors of Chinese descent was unsuccessful. It did, however, contribute to an us versus them mentality that divided Americans and heightened tensions across the country. It is particularly disappointing that we are engaging in this partisan exercise, because the fact is that Democrats and Republicans largely agree that China does pose a threat to the United States. The Judiciary Committee's Intellectual Property Subcommittee, where I am ranking member, has conducted several bipartisan hearings on the threat posed by the Chinese government's theft of trade secrets. Democrats and Republicans agreed that there is a real significant threat to our economy and national security. There are bipartisan bills out there for markup, ones that could pass on suspension today, but instead the majority has chosen to take up highly partisan bills that divide us. Since the end of the China initiative, the DOJ has embraced a broader strategy to counter threats from hostile nations, not just China, but Iran, North Korea, and, to the disappointment of Donald Trump, Russia. The Disruptive Technology Strike Force has been lauded by both sides of the aisle for doing what the China initiative failed to do. It collaborates across agencies to prevent nation-state actors from illicitly acquiring our most sensitive technology by successfully investigating and prosecuting illegal procurement networks, including those involving Chinese nationals. We are on the right path to protecting our nation's secrets and keeping Americans safe. This legislation would take us in the opposite direction, and I encourage members to oppose this legislation, and I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. I don't know, Representative Gooden, do you have any response to some of the things that have just been said?
Sure. I'll say that during the Trump initiative, which was then called the China initiative, there were 8 convictions, and since it has been discontinued, there have only been 2. And I'm always disappointed when I hear the race card played, but I'm happy to talk about that with respect to China, because they are actually the one who use race as a factor. They prey on Chinese Americans. And when I say we have to protect our people, I'm talking about our people that are Chinese Americans. And many times they come here, they are successful, they are very hesitant to develop new products, new ideas. They're worried about their families back in mainland China, if they have families still back home that they are preyed on by the Chinese government. They're threatened. We've got police stations, Chinese police stations in various cities in the United States of America. We've had this recent example of the governor of New York's staffer being a Chinese spy. The severity of the problem is really quite great. But this is really one issue where I think it's important to talk about race, because the racists here are the Chinese Communist Party, because they don't pick on folks that, frankly, look like all of the members that I'm looking at on this committee. They're picking on Chinese Americans, and I think it's wrong. And the Chinese Americans that we talk to, they actually are in fear in many cases with the predatory practices by the Chinese Communist Party. And I think what this bill does is it seeks to address a problem that FBI Director Wray said was truly one of our greatest problems here in the United States, and that is to send a message to the Chinese Communist Party that we are going to take care of our people. And our people are the Chinese American citizens that are preyed on by this government.
Thank you. I will have no further questions. I'll yield to the ranking member.
I have no questions. Thank you for being here.
May I respond, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I would just simply, and I appreciate the opportunity to respond, I would just simply say that out of 150 prosecutions leveled at Chinese people working in America during the Trump reign, only 8 convictions, and I believe that there have been a fair number of those that have been overturned on appeal. That's not a good record. In fact, it shows a record of failure. And in terms of the race card being played, Donald Trump has been the master of it, even more than if you accept the argument that the Chinese government is racist for preying on its own people, which it does. Donald Trump has been even more racist in his xenophobic appeals than the Chinese government has been.
Mr. Chairman, I object to, I mean, it's not appropriate to call specifically somebody racist in this committee. It's just not. Calling somebody by name and calling them a racist is not appropriate.
Well, I'm talking about racist policies. I'll clarify. And with that, I yield back.
Sure, thanks, the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized for questions.
Thank you. And I have no other questions. I don't know if there was anything else you can add, but you sounded like you covered what you needed to. And is that correct? With that, I yield back.
Thank you. I want to thank our witnesses for appearing before us today. This panel is excused.